shared this before last week, is like, how many know if you just get around Jesus, like the more you hang around Jesus, the more time you spend with Jesus, more time you spend in his word, the more time you spend with him in prayer, more time you spend with him in places like this, how many know you're going to change? Like, God's going to do a work in your life. He's going to bring about blessing in your life. He's going to transform you. He's going to change you. But where a lot of us go wrong is when we start to think that the blessing and the change is happening in our life, all of a sudden is not a result of his grace and his kindness and his goodness, but it's something that I was responsible for. That somehow, maybe I kind of, when it comes to the things God's doing in my life, that I had some part to play in that I was, is because of my goodness and because of, I was just so faithful or kind of like the older brother there. I was working hard. Every day I was in the fields. I was doing the job, right? And in fact, and it can be simple too. I mean, some of us, we can kind of carry this mindset even just being here in church. Like for some of us, we think that somehow maybe we're kind of like doing God a favor just by being in church, right? Like God, you owe me something because, I'm here. And if I put $5 in the offering bucket, like you really owe me. Like I'm expecting a good week. And we can kind of walk with this sort of entitlement mentality when we lose sight, when we start in the wrong place when it comes to this area of forgiveness, where we lose sight of what we've been forgiven. But even more than that, what can happen is even more than just a kind of an entitlement mentality, is we can have a very judgmental mentality, a very judgmental mindset and outlook when it comes to others as well, when we lose a sight of what we've been forgiven. In fact, I put in my notes this way, is that when we minimize our own sins, we have a tendency to magnify other people's. When we minimize our own sin and the grace that we didn't deserve, the forgiveness that we didn't deserve. And when we minimize our own sins and we think we got it more together than maybe we really do, we can have a tendency to magnify other people's. In fact, for some of you, that's the reason why you really struggle to come to church. Maybe struggle to come even tonight. It's because you grew up in a church filled with older brothers. You grew up with a church of people who were experts on being able to call out and focus and see everyone else's sin but their own, right? And they would even, phrase it in ways that almost even sounded good. Well, the reason that we're calling this out, the reason we're calling out the sin it is the Bible. Hey, the Bible says it hates sin. We should hate sin. But the problem is not that they hate sin. The problem is that the only sin they hate is other people's. Or we say, well, I just got righteous indignation. But let's be honest, the only sin you're angry about is other people's sin. And the sin that you seem to be okay with is the one you struggle the most with. Again, it's this older brother mindset. When we minimize our own sins, we have a tendency to magnify other people's. We have this tendency to, come out with this judgmental spirit, this judgmental perspective, this judgmental attitude. In fact, this was the very reason at the very heart of this parable, this story that Jesus tells. He's speaking this actually to a group that struggles with this very thing. He's speaking it to a group of religious, kind of this hypocritical group, this group of sort of just all in self-righteousness, people who were experts in recognizing everyone else's sin but their own. And listen, the danger with this is when we fall into this trap, when we fall into this category, is when you fail to realize your own problems, again, you lose compassion, I believe, for the problems of others. Whenever you lose sight of what you've been forgiven, when you start with anyone and anything else, when we're talking this concept of forgiveness and grace besides yourself, and encountering his forgiveness in your life and realizing and remembering and reminding yourself the incredible cost and toll and what Jesus paid for you on the cross, when you fail to realize what you've been delivered from, what you've been saved from, you lose compassion for the problems of others, the struggles of others, the issues of others. And yet in saying that, can I tell you the reverse is also true? The more that you remind yourself of just the grace of Jesus Christ, the more you remind yourself of the incredible price he paid for you, the more you're aware and the more you can see the real issues and the real hurt and the real struggle behind sometimes the surface things that we love to get offended about and we love to get frustrated about. In fact, that's why Jesus says in Matthew 3, he says, listen, why are you so concerned with a little piece of sawdust in your brother's eye, but don't even care about the plank in your own? In other words, you really want to help some people this Christmas season. You really want to help minister. And if you're really serious about seeing them find freedom, see them find joy, listen, it starts with you, not with their issue. It starts with your issue. It starts with pulling the plank out of your eye, because when you pull the plank out of your eye, when you remind yourself of what you've been forgiven, it enables you to actually have compassion and better see the real issue at hand, the real struggle at hand. It's been said that really when you get down to it is hurt people. And I think that's so true. And so often we get so offended by surface things and we just kind of push people off to the side because we never ever get to the real issue at hand, because we get all caught up in just seeing it from an issue of, oh, it's their problem, their issue, and never starting with ourselves and dealing and reminding ourselves of what we've been forgiven. So that's the first thing when it comes to our struggle of forgiveness. The second thing is we see forgiveness as something to be earned. We see forgiveness as something to be earned, or you could put it this way, we see forgiveness as a response to others rather than an approach to others. We see forgiveness as a response to others rather than an approach to others. We'll forgive them when they show that they've earned forgiveness. Like when they've done something to kind of prove and show that they've really had a change of heart, that they feel bad about what they actually did. They feel bad about what they said. They feel bad about what they posted. Like when they take the first step, then I'll actually show forgiveness. And listen, this is the sticking point for a lot of us. Is we think that because of this, if I forgive them, if I somehow instead take the first step, if I show forgiveness before they've done anything to somehow try to earn it, somehow try to deserve it, that somehow I'm letting them off the hook. Somehow justice isn't being served. If I forgive them, it will make it look like what they did is somehow okay. Somehow okay with me, that somehow maybe it didn't hurt me the way that it really did hurt me. And so we kind of go with this mindset as we think that forgiveness is somehow a statement about the other person, that it's somehow a reflection on them. But here's the truth about forgiveness that you got to get, is that forgiveness has nothing to do with the character of the one who wronged you. Forgiveness doesn't not indicate that they've done right, that they somehow deserve it. It doesn't indicate that they've taken the right steps to restore the relationship. Truth is, they could be absolutely wrong. But listen, here's what forgiveness does show. See, forgiveness reveals the character of the giver, not the receiver. Forgiveness reveals the character, reveals the heart of the giver, not the receiver. Ultimate example of this was Jesus on the cross, right? Here, Jesus falsely accused. He's being ridiculed. He's being persecuted. He's being spat at. He's being laughed at. Suffering, experiencing the full weight of humanity's sin, humanity's depravity. And yet, even in the very midst of it, he's able to say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Whose character was being revealed in that moment? Yeah, Jesus's. The reason he was able to say those words was not because what the people were doing in that moment, what our sin maybe wasn't really all that bad. No, it was because our God is that good. It is because his heart for you is that great. His love for you is that great. And listen, the people who have hurt you, who have abused you, who've forsaken you, who've abandoned you, who've wounded you so deeply, you got to know that you forgiving them is not a statement about them. It is a statement about you. It doesn't say they're right. It doesn't let them off the hook. It doesn't say I'm healed, or it doesn't say that I'm that somehow that what they did was okay. That somehow, no. What it's saying when you do that, when you choose to forgive, what you're saying is that I am healed. Is that I'm whole. I'm not going to let what happened to me define me anymore. That God's grace in my life is sufficient for me. It's sufficient for me. It doesn't get them off the hook. It doesn't act like what they did didn't matter. But what it does is acknowledge that God is doing something in my life that allows me to move on no matter what happened to me. It's this choice to say, I'm not going to choose to be a victim of that thing they said about me. I'm choosing to not be a victim to the thing they did against me, the wound that they brought into my life. It's a statement of again, surrender. It's trusting in God's judgment. It's trusting that God can handle this. And again, it's a statement. When you surrender that, when you say forgiven, it's more of a reflection. It's a statement not about them, but it's a statement about you. And interesting enough, too, is that not only does forgiveness reveal our character, reveal our heart, but also unforgiveness can reveal something about us, too. In fact, we see that in this story. Again, the older brother, I find it interesting what he says there in verse 29. He says, again, I've never disobeyed any of your orders. Now it's an interesting statement because I think it's less a statement of something that he actually believed about himself. I don't think he necessarily really believed that was the case in his life. But listen, I think this was a statement that had less to do about what he believed about himself and more what had to do with what he believed about his father and specifically his relationship and the expectations that he believed his father had for him. See, this was a statement that had less to do about who he was, who he thought he was, but I believe it had everything to do with who he thought he had to be. See, this was a statement. He thought that was the expectation his father had. That the expectation was perfection. The expectation was to get it all together. The expectation was to get your life all figured out, that somehow you had to get all your stuff together, you had to get life figured out. Then and only then could you actually encounter the forgiveness, encounter the grace, encounter acceptance from the Father. And how many of us take the same approach with God? How many of us take that same perspective that could have been one of the reasons we struggle with unforgiveness is because, again, that's kind of the expectation we think of the Father. That we've never really encountered His grace. We've never really encountered His forgiveness because that was what we thought that God was looking for from us. That the expectation, the standard was perfection from us. When in reality, the expectation was just simply confession. It's just simply honesty, the willingness to surrender and say, God, here I am with all of my mess and all of my stuff. It's receiving the gift of grace, understanding that it's not something you can earn, something that you can achieve or do on your own. In fact, I think one of the most tragic things that we find that's happened over in the church over the years is kind of this mindset, this kind of false expectation that's kind of that's what God's looking for. And we almost kind of have created these environments, created this culture where it was not okay to not be okay. So people start acting like they were okay when they were not okay. And some of us still do this. Maybe you walked in here even tonight, like, how you doing? Okay. But you're not really okay. And we've created these churches and created these environments where it was not okay to be honest about my struggles, to be honest about my addictions, to be honest about my issues. We can do this even in our homes. Where we kind of create these homes where we, again, put the expectation, create the expectation as one of almost perfection rather than one of confession. In fact, when you look back to this story, it's interesting that again, it wasn't just the older son who had this false expectation or belief that the father's expectation was perfection. It was also the younger son, too. Because remember in the story, the younger son, when he comes back, he thinks that the way to get back into the good graces of his father was to somehow, work. Oh, if I just work, maybe he'll hire me on as a slave. If I can just work hard enough, if I can try hard enough, maybe I'll somehow win my father's approval, win my father's acceptance again. And again, and I share that with you because I think this Christmas, especially those of you with kids and those of you with grandkids, I think one of the greatest challenges and really one of the greatest things you can do this Christmas season is my challenge for you is really create a culture of confession in your home instead of an expectation of perfection. Create a culture of confession in your home instead of an expectation of perfection. In fact, my wife is really good with this, with Austin. In fact, I've found several times Holly when talking with Austin, she's shared multiple times with him. It's like, you know what, you won't get in trouble over this if you're just honest. If you'll just share with us right from the get-go, what you did, if you did anything wrong, if you just come to us first rather than us finding out later. Because if we find out later, then you really are going to be in trouble. But I love that because what it's doing is it's creating a culture of confession, a culture of honesty. And why that's important is because the Bible's really clear is that listen, we confess one to another that you may be healed. See, listen, if you want to foster an environment and create a change, in some cases change the culture of your home, something change the culture of your workplace, then create a culture of confession where it's safe to be honest, where the expectation isn't perfection, the expectation is confession. This is the place where healing, where restoration, where forgiveness is fostered in these type of cultures, these type of climates, right? So again, when it comes to forgiveness, oftentimes we need to learn to start with ourselves. We also need to learn to really, have this culture of confession more than this expectation of perfection, and really embrace, really understand that, again, this grace that we've been given, this gift that we've been given of forgiveness, it's not by something we've earned, something we do. It's just simply a gift we receive. This leads to the third and final one, is that we think that forgiveness will leave us with less. I think sometimes we struggle with forgiveness because we think that somehow it's going to leave us with less. If I forgive them, I'm going to end up with the short end of the stick. I'm going to get left holding the bag. If I forgive them, I'm going to end up with less in my life. Certainly that was the case for the older brother. When you look at the context of the story, again, the context of the story starts out with this younger brother basically saying, hey, Dad, you're as good as dead to me. I wish I could just have the inheritance, have my money now. And of course, how it worked that day is that the older son, typically when it came to his inheritance, he would get 2/3 of the inheritance. When the father died, the younger son would get 1/3. And so kind of the amazing thing is the story is even before the dad's dead, is he agrees to give the younger son his share of the inheritance, his 1/3 of the inheritance, only to have the younger son go. And of course, you know how the story goes. He heads off to Vegas, parties it away, and he comes back home, right? And again, So again, that's the context of the story. And so it might help us to kind of understand why the older brother is mad in the first place, why he's so frustrated, why he's struggling to forgive, is because what he's seeing, this act of his father receiving his younger brother, giving him a ring, giving him a robe, giving him shoes. Every time he's seeing every one of these acts of generosity, these acts of forgiveness, he's seeing as somehow taking away from him. So every time the older son saw this stuff being given to his younger brother, all he saw was, well, that's one less ring for me. Because again, he's pulling from the older son's stuff to give to the younger son. That's one less pair of Air Jordans. That's one less robe. That's one less steak in the fridge for me. And him being forgiven means I end up with less. And some of us, we have these same attitudes where maybe we've thought this or we've said this, where if I forgive them, it means they got away with it. If I forgive them, it means they win and I somehow lose. In fact, some of us, if we're honest, we would rather win than have peace in our family, peace in our relationships, peace in our home. And this is the problem with unforgiveness, actually, is that unforgiveness at its core, it would always rather make a point than make things right. It would always rather be right than again make things right. And again, what's interesting about this story, and again, the kind of the sobering reality of it is when you actually look at the story, who technically loses, I guess, or I should say loses out in this story. Interesting enough, it's not the person who messed up. It's not the younger son who partied his life away in Vegas. No, it was the older son. It was the one who couldn't forgive, who kept seeing forgiveness as, well, if I forgive, somehow I'm going to come away with less. Somehow I'm going to lose out on something. And yet the reality is, when it comes to forgiveness, the only person that loses out when it comes to forgiveness is the person who refuses to show it. Because that's what we see in the story. Notice how the story ends. The story ends, basically, the father tries everything he can to get the older son to come into the house, and he refuses it because he can't get to that place of showing forgiveness, of showing the grace that he had been given, the love that he had been given, the forgiveness he had been given. And instead, he holds on to bitterness. He holds on to resentment. And so the story ends with everyone else in the house having this amazing Christmas party. They're singing and dancing and rejoicing, and the only one who loses out on it is the one who couldn't forgive, the older brother, the older son. See again, forgiveness, when it comes to this thing of forgiveness, listen, the only way you lose out is when you choose to not forgive, when you choose to hold on to the resentment, you choose to hold on to the bitterness, you choose to hold on to the issue. And listen, I want to kind of just real quickly kind of wrap over this, because here's the thing, what I love about this story and why I spend so much time on just this whole aspect of forgiveness. Because again, I started this whole thing by telling you that again, you can forgive without reconciling. You can make the choice to forgive somebody, because let's be honest, there's some situations where you can't find reconciliation. Maybe they've passed away, or they just don't want